What happens when this woman you threw away, the woman you called simple, unambitious, and a weight holding you down, lands in a life you can only dream of? Ethan Vance thought he had it all: a corner office, a seven-figure salary, and a stunning new trophy wife. He discarded his college sweetheart Eleanor, believing he had upgraded in every possible way. He would see her one last time at a corporate event he thought was the pinnacle of his success, only to discover the quiet, unassuming man on her arm wasn't just her new partner. He was the sole owner of the entire company Ethan had dedicated his life to, and the ultimate revenge was about to be served, not hot and loud, but cold, silent, and absolutely devastating. This is the story of how a man who thought he'd reached the summit was pushed from the peak by the ghost of a life he so carelessly abandoned. The air in the minimalist million-dollar condo felt thin and sterile, just like the conversation. Ethan Vance adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Tom Ford shirt, the crisp fabric a stark contrast to the fraying edges of his 14-year marriage to Eleanor. "It's just not working, Ellie," he said, his voice laced with a practiced, almost bored finality. He avoided her eyes, instead staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the glittering expanse of the city below. This view, this apartment, this life, he had earned it. And Eleanor, in her faded jeans and a simple grey t-shirt, no longer fit the picture. Eleanor clutched a lukewarm mug of tea, her knuckles white. Her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. 14 years, Ethan. That's not just something you decide isn't working, like a faulty appliance. "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed, finally turning to face her. His gaze swept over her, and she could feel him cataloging her perceived flaws: the absence of makeup, the hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, the lack of designer labels. "We want different things. I have goals, ambitions. I'm on the cusp of making senior managing director at Vanguard Capital. I need a partner who complements that, someone who thrives in that world." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Someone who isn't you. Eleanor had been a rising star in the art history world, a curator with a sharp eye and a passion that lit up every room she entered. But when Ethan's career in finance began its meteoric ascent, the demands grew. The constant travel, the late-night schmoozing, the expectation that she would be the perfect smiling hostess at a moment's notice. She had willingly stepped back, putting her own ambitions on hold to support his. She managed their life, their home, his social calendar, creating the stable foundation upon which he built his empire. She thought it was a partnership. He, it was now clear, saw it as a service contract that had expired. "So all this time," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "the dinner parties I hosted for your clients, the weekends I spent alone while you were on business trips, the career I gave up, that was me holding you back." "It was a different phase," he said dismissively, waving a hand as if brushing away a pesky fly. "We were kids when we met. We've grown apart. My life is moving in a certain direction, and yours is, well, it's static. You're comfortable. You lack drive, Ellie. You're happy with your books and your quiet little life. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not enough for me." That was the deepest cut. He had taken her contentment, the peace she had cultivated in the small spaces he allowed her, and twisted it into a character flaw. The divorce was a brutal, efficient affair. Ethan's lawyers, sharp and merciless, carved up their shared life with surgical precision. He was generous, he kept telling everyone. He let her have the modest savings account they'd started in their 20s, and half the equity from the sale of their first home, a pittance compared to the fortune he had amassed in his own name. The condo, The art collection she had curated, the portfolio of stocks that was all his, the fruits of his labor. The final day, as Eleanor packed the last of her personal belongings into cardboard boxes, Ethan walked in with her, Tiffany, a woman who looked like she had been assembled in a lab for the specific purpose of being a billionaire's girlfriend. She was all long blonde hair, impossibly white teeth, and a dress that cost more than Eleanor's first car. She glided through the space, her eyes scanning the art on the walls with a vacant proprietary air. "Ethan, darling," Tiffany purred, ignoring Eleanor completely. "Are you sure you want to let that one go? The colors are a bit drab." She was pointing to a painting by a lesser-known impressionist that Eleanor had discovered and cherished, a piece that represented the last vestiges of her old life. Ethan chuckled, a sound that made Eleanor's stomach clench. "Whatever you want, babe. We can redecorate everything. A completely fresh start." Eleanor froze, a box of books in her arms. She looked at Ethan, this man she had loved since she was 19, and saw a complete stranger. The warmth in his eyes, the easy laugh she used to adore, had been replaced by a cold, metallic sheen. He looked right through her, his face a mask of indifference. She didn't say a word. She simply turned, walked out of the condo, and didn't look back. As the elevator descended, she caught her reflection in the polished brass doors. She looked tired, defeated. The woman Ethan described, static, ambitionless, comfortable, stared back at her. For a terrifying moment, she believed him. Her new apartment was small, a second-floor walk-up, in a neighborhood with more character than glamour. The first few months were a blur of quiet grief. The silence was the loudest part. There were no last-minute client dinners to prepare for, no suits to pick up from the dry cleaners, no ego to manage. There was just her. She unpacked the boxes from her old life, and with them, the woman she used to be. She laid out her art history textbooks, her research papers, the catalogs from exhibitions she had helped curate years ago. It felt like archaeology, digging up the fossilized remains of a forgotten dream. One rainy Tuesday, staring at the blank walls of her apartment, a spark ignited. It wasn't the roaring fire of Ethan's ambition, but a small, steady flame. She deserved more than this quiet sadness. She deserved to be surrounded by beauty, the kind she understood, the kind she had once been an expert in. She took the generous settlement from Ethan, and instead of clinging to it for security, made a decision. She wasn't going to be static. She was going to invest in herself. She started a small one-woman art advisory firm from her dining room table. She called it Hayes Curations. Her first clients were old contacts from her university days, friends who had stayed in the art world and remembered her talent. The work was slow, at first, sourcing single pieces for modest homes, helping young collectors make their first purchases. It wasn't the high-stakes world of multi-million-dollar auctions she once dreamed of, but it was hers. Every success, no matter how small, was a brick she laid in the foundation of her new life. She didn't follow Ethan's life, but it was impossible to avoid it completely. He was a fixture in the city's society pages, always photographed with Tiffany draped on his arm. Finance magnate Ethan Vance and socialite Tiffany Hayes at the opera gala. Power couple dazzles at charity ball. They were the picture of success, and with every glossy photo, the world seemed to affirm his decision. He had upgraded. He had won. Eleanor, meanwhile, was a footnote in a story he was no longer telling. But as she hung the final piece of art in a client's home, a vibrant abstract that brought the entire room to life, she felt a sense of satisfaction that no society photo could ever capture. She was building something real, something of her own. and she was just getting started. Jovian Croft moved through the world like a ghost. He was one of a handful of people on the planet whose wealth was so vast, so deeply entrenched in the bedrock of the global economy that it afforded him the one luxury no one else could buy: true anonymity. He owned shipping lines, tech incubators, vast swathes of commercial real estate, and a portfolio of private equity firms, one of which was a mid-level performer he barely thought about, called Vanguard Capital Partners. His name wasn't on any building. He didn't grant interviews. His holding company, Croft Holdings International, was a name whispered in the highest echelons of finance, but utterly unknown to the public. His passion, the place where he spent both his money and his time, was art. He didn't collect for investment or for status. He collected because it was the only thing that made the noise of his life quiet down. In the silent conversation between a viewer and a canvas, he found a clarity that billion-dollar balance sheets could never provide. He heard about Eleanor Hayes through a trusted source, the director of a major museum to whom Jovian was a significant, albeit anonymous, donor. "There's a woman," the director had said over lunch, "Eleanor Hayes. She was brilliant, one of my best students years ago. She vanished into a marriage for a while, but she's back on her own doing advisory work. She has the eye. She doesn't just see a painting, she sees the soul behind it. She finds stories, not just assets." The word stories piqued Jovian's interest. He was tired of dealers who talked only of auction records and appreciation potential. He asked the director to make a quiet introduction. The first time Eleanor met Jovian, it was at a small, independent coffee shop halfway between her apartment and his discreet downtown office. She had been nervous, expecting a pompous, elderly tycoon. The man who stood to greet her was anything but. He was in his late 40s, with kind, intelligent eyes that held a hint of weariness. He was dressed in a simple, well-made cashmere sweater and dark jeans. There was an aura of stillness about him, a stark contrast to Ethan's frenetic, restless energy. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice calm and warm. "Jovian Croft, thank you for meeting me. Please call me Eleanor." Their conversation wasn't about money. He didn't ask her about her rates. Instead, he asked her what she was passionate about. He wanted to know which period of art made her feel the most, which artists she felt were criminally overlooked. She found herself talking for an hour, the words tumbling out with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. She spoke of the Dutch masters, of the quiet dignity of a Vermeer, the raw, chaotic emotion of a Turner seascape. He listened, truly listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't check his phone, didn't steer the conversation back to himself. When she finally paused, slightly embarrassed by her own fervor, he simply smiled. "I'm looking for a piece," he said. "Something for my personal study. It's a quiet room. I want the art to reflect that. Not silence, but a quiet contemplation. Can you help me find that?" It was the most beautiful, articulate brief she had ever received. Their relationship unfolded over a series of gallery visits, studio tours with up-and-coming artists, and long conversations over coffee. He was a puzzle she delighted in slowly solving. He was clearly a man of immense means, yet there was no ostentation. He drove a modest, by billionaire standards, electric sedan. His watch was elegant, but not flashy. He spoke of business trips to Singapore and Zurich with the same casualness that Ethan spoke of a weekend in the Hamptons, but he never named his company or his role. Eleanor found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with Ethan. She told him about her abandoned academic career, the slow erosion of her confidence during her marriage, and the quiet joy she was finding in rebuilding her life on her own terms. "He told me I lacked drive," she confessed one afternoon, standing before a Rothko that seemed to vibrate with color. "He saw my contentment as a weakness." Jovian was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the canvas. Contentment isn't the opposite of drive, he said, finally, his voice soft. It's the fuel. A man who needs constant chaos to feel alive is a man running from himself, a person who can find peace in a quiet room. That's a person who has already won. His words settled over her like a warm blanket. For the first time, she saw her own nature not as a liability, but as a strength. One evening, he invited her to his home for dinner. It wasn't a sprawling mansion, but a breathtaking penthouse apartment that occupied the entire top floor of a historic pre-war building. The space was a masterpiece of understated luxury, warm woods, soft lighting, and walls adorned with the most incredible private art collection she had ever seen. There was a small Monet, a de Kooning sketch, a breathtaking Richter. "This is extraordinary, Jovian," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's just home," he said with a small shrug. "It's where I come to be quiet." He had cooked for her himself, a simple but delicious pasta dish. They ate on a small terrace overlooking the park, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. It was in that moment, with the taste of good wine on her lips and the comfortable silence stretching between them, that Eleanor realized she was falling in love. It was a different kind of love from what she'd known. It wasn't the frantic, all-consuming passion of her youth with Ethan. This was a slow, deep current, a sense of coming home to a place she didn't even know she was searching for. As their relationship deepened, she began to manage his entire collection, advising on acquisitions, overseeing restorations, and cataloging his works. He trusted her implicitly. He gave her a budget that made her head spin, but his instructions were always the same. Buy what's important, Ellie. Buy the stories that need to be told. She never pressed him about the specifics of his business. She knew he was the head of Croft Holdings, a private investment firm. To her, it was just a name, the source of the funds that allowed them this beautiful life. She had no idea of its scale, no concept of the vast corporate machinery that churned silently beneath the surface of their idyllic world. She didn't care. She was in love with Jovian Croft, the man who listened, the man who understood the value of quiet, the man who saw her not as an accessory, but as a partner. One night, they were curled up on the sofa, a documentary about artist Jean-Michel Basquiat playing softly on the screen. Jovian was reviewing some documents on a tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Everything okay?" she asked, tracing a pattern on his sleeve. "Just a routine Q3 review for one of our acquisitions," he murmured, his eyes still on the screen. "A private equity firm we bought a few years back. They're a bit aggressive for my taste, but they post good numbers." He swiped a finger across the screen, pulling up an organizational chart. "The board is pushing for a big new M&A deal. Their top guy is chomping at the bit. A real shark, apparently." "What's the firm called?" she asked idly, her attention mostly on the documentary. "Vanguard Capital Partners," he said without looking up. The name hit her like a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. Vanguard. Ethan's company. The company he had sacrificed their marriage for. The company where he was a shark, desperate to make his mark. She stared at the side of Jovian's face, at this kind, quiet man who was her entire world now. He was talking about Ethan's firm as a minor asset, a line item on a balance sheet. He swiped the screen again, and an email chain appeared. She saw the name Ethan Vance in the to field of a memo. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, dizzying clarity. Jovian wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just successful. He was Ethan's boss. Not just his boss, but the ultimate authority, the invisible hand, the god in the machine. She felt a wave of nausea, followed by a strange, chilling calm. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. All this time, Ethan had been climbing a ladder, clawing his way to the top, desperate for the approval of a man he had never met. And that man was now falling asleep on the sofa, with his head in the lap of the woman Ethan had thrown away like trash. She looked at Jovian, his face softened in the dim light, and then she thought of Ethan, arrogant and proud, strutting through the halls of Vanguard, completely oblivious. The drama he had written for their lives, where he was the conquering hero and she, the forgotten prologue, was about to have a twist he could never have imagined. And the curtain was about to rise. Ethan Vance felt invincible. He was standing on the precipice of the deal that would cement his legacy at Vanguard Capital. For 6 months, he had been spearheading the hostile takeover of a smaller but brilliantly innovative biotech firm called Gene Synth. It was a ruthless, aggressive campaign that had pushed legal and ethical boundaries, but Ethan thrived on that adrenaline. This was the kill that would finally get him the managing director title, the 8-figure bonus, and the fawning respect he craved. His life with Tiffany was exactly as he'd designed it, a whirlwind of black-tie galas, exclusive resort vacations, and extravagant spending. Tiffany was the perfect accessory, beautiful and vapid, her conversation never straying to anything more complex than her next spa appointment or the latest gossip from her social circle. She was a reflection of his success, and he loved her for it. Yet sometimes, in the dead of night, a sliver of unease would creep in. He'd look at Tiffany's perfectly placid face, asleep beside him, and feel a profound emptiness. He'd remember a time when conversation meant debating art or philosophy with Eleanor until 2 a.m., her eyes alight with passion. He would banish the thought as quickly as it came, dismissing it as a momentary weakness. He had made his choice. This was the better life. One evening, he and Tiffany were dining at Morley, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant where reservations were a status symbol. He was celebrating a preliminary victory in the Gene Synth deal. "To us," he said, raising his glass of vintage Bordeaux, "and to my new kingdom." Tiffany giggled, clinking her glass against his. "I saw the most divine diamond bracelet at Cartier today, darling. It would look perfect with my dress for the Vanguard Gala." Ethan barely heard her. His eyes had drifted across the opulent dining room and frozen. There, at a secluded corner table, was Eleanor. But it wasn't the Eleanor he remembered. The tired, defeated woman from the condo was gone. This Eleanor was radiant. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut emerald green dress that highlighted the warmth in her skin. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and she was laughing, a genuine, uninhibited sound that seemed to fill the space around her. And the man she was with, Ethan's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize him. The man wasn't flashy. He was dressed in a quiet, expensive suit, his attention focused solely on Eleanor. There was an intimacy between them, a comfortable ease that spoke of something deep and real. Ethan felt a hot, unfamiliar spike of jealousy. It was absurd. He had Tiffany. He had everything. So why did the sight of his static ex-wife looking so vibrantly happy feel like a personal insult? "Who is that?" Tiffany asked, following his gaze. "Is that your ex? God, what is she wearing?" "It's no one," Ethan snapped, turning his attention back to his plate. But his appetite was gone. He watched them out of the corner of his eye for the rest of the meal. He saw the man place a hand over Eleanor's, his touch gentle and possessive. He saw the way Eleanor looked at him with an adoration that she had once reserved for Ethan alone. He told himself it didn't matter. She was probably dating some boring professor or a mid-level accountant. Good for her. The incident, however, burrowed under his skin. He found himself idly searching for her online, a thing he hadn't done since the divorce. He found the website for Hayes Curations. It was professional elegant. The portfolio section showcased impressive projects rooms transformed by her impeccable taste. A small biography mentioned her work with private collectors. He scoffed. It was a glorified shopping service. Still, it was more than he expected. Meanwhile, Eleanor was living in a state of surreal awareness. Knowing Jovian's secret, while he remained oblivious to its significance to her, was a constant low-level hum beneath the surface of their life. She wrestled with when or if to tell him. It felt like a betrayal of their peaceful world to bring the ugliness of her past with Ethan into it. And a part of her, a dark, hidden part, was morbidly curious to see how it would all play out. The annual Vanguard Capital Partners Gala was the event of the season in the financial world. It was a night of pure, unadulterated self-congratulation, and for Ethan, it was his coronation. The Gene Synth deal was all but finalized. The board had approved it, and all that was left was the final sign-off from the notoriously reclusive owner of the parent company Croft Holdings. It was a formality, he was assured. The owner trusted Vanguard's leadership. "This is it, Tiff," he said, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror of their penthouse. "Tonight, everyone is going to see who runs this city." Eleanor had initially declined Jovian's invitation to the gala. "A corporate party, Jovian, that's not our scene. It sounds dreadful." Jovian had smiled. "I know, and I promise we'll only stay for an hour. But this one is unavoidable. The board has been begging me to make an appearance for years. They think it will be good for morale. And," he added, his eyes twinkling, "they are giving an award for Dealmaker of the Year, and I'm expected to present it. I need my beautiful partner there for moral support." She had relented, a knot of dread and anticipation forming in her stomach. Vanguard Capital, Dealmaker of the Year. It had to be Ethan. The universe wasn't just humorous, it was a cruel, brilliant playwright. She chose her dress with care. It was a stunning, midnight blue silk gown that was both elegant and powerful. It was a suit of armor. As she stood before the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't Ethan's mousy ex-wife, nor was it the quiet art advisor. This was a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who stood beside one of the most powerful men in the world, not as an accessory, but as an equal. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns, buzzing with the energy of 1,000 egos. Ethan and Tiffany were holding court near the entrance, Ethan basking in the congratulations of his colleagues. "A masterpiece, Vance," his direct boss Robert Miller boomed, clapping him on the back. "The Gene Synth acquisition will be studied for years. The man from Croft Holdings will be very pleased." Ethan preened. "Just doing my job, Robert." It was then that a hush fell over the room. The conversations trickled to a stop. Heads turned towards the grand entrance. Jovian Croft had arrived. He moved with that same quiet grace, but in this context, it was magnified into an aura of immense power. The crowd parted for him as if by an invisible force, and on his arm, looking serene and impossibly beautiful, was Eleanor. Ethan's glass of champagne slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was lost in the collective gasp of the room. He stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. It was like watching two worlds collide, two narratives that should never ever have intersected. Eleanor, with the man from the restaurant, here, and everyone was staring at him, not with admiration, but with a dawning, horrified awe. The man who had been a phantom, a legend, the ultimate source of power in their world, was here, and his ex-wife was on his arm. Tiffany's grip on his arm tightened. "Ethan, what's going on? Who is that man?" Ethan couldn't speak. His throat was dry. He saw Robert Miller, the CEO of Vanguard, striding forward, his face a mixture of reverence and shock. "Mr. Croft, we are deeply honored by your presence." Mr. Croft. The name echoed in the cavern of Ethan's skull. Croft. Croft Holdings International. The parent company, the owner. His blood ran cold. The invincible feeling evaporated, replaced by a dread so profound it was paralyzing. The man from the restaurant, the boring professor, he had dismissed the man his ex-wife was gazing at with such love, was not just some anonymous suitor. He owned them. He owned Vanguard. He owned Ethan. Eleanor's eyes, calm and steady, met his from across the room. There was no malice in them, no triumph. There was just a quiet, devastating understanding. In that single glance, Ethan Vance's entire world, the kingdom he had built on the ashes of his marriage, crumbled into dust. The ballroom felt like it had been sucked of all oxygen. To Ethan, the glittering chandeliers, the orchestra playing softly, the clinking of glasses, it all seemed like a surreal, distant dream. His reality had shrunk to the space between him and the couple standing at the entrance, the woman he deemed worthless, and the man who held his entire professional life in the palm of his hand. Jovian, seemingly oblivious to the shockwave he'd created, gave a polite nod to the Vanguard CEO. "Robert, a fine event," he said, his voice carrying easily in the hushed room. His eyes, however, were on Eleanor. "I believe you know my partner, Eleanor Hayes." Robert Miller's head snapped towards Eleanor, his face a comical mask of confusion and panic. He had met Eleanor a few times over the years, always in the context of being Ethan Vance's quiet wife. To see her here presented as the partner of the firm's ultimate owner was a paradigm shift he couldn't compute. "Eleanor, yes, of course. How wonderful to see you," he stammered, his sycophantic smile twitching. Eleanor's expression was one of cool, detached grace. "Robert, it's been a long time." Her gaze flickered past him, landing once more on Ethan for a fraction of a second before returning to Jovian's side. The Dealmaker of the Year awards ceremony was a public execution. Ethan, who had been anticipating this moment for months, had to walk from his table to the stage on legs that felt like they were made of lead. The applause was scattered, confused. The whispers were louder than the clapping. He stood on stage, bathed in a spotlight that now felt like an interrogation lamp. Jovian was handed the heavy crystal award. He walked to the podium, his presence commanding the absolute attention of every person in the room. "Good evening," Jovian began, his voice calm and measured. "Vanguard Capital has had a profitable year, and a key part of that has been the aggressive M&A strategy led by Mr. Ethan Vance." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. He turned slightly to look at Ethan, who felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The GeneSynth takeover in particular has been noted for its tenacity. Jovian continued choosing the word with surgical precision. It was a campaign that valued victory above all else. It has undoubtedly secured a significant asset for the portfolio. Ethan felt a faint glimmer of hope. Perhaps this would be okay. Perhaps Croft was a pragmatist who only cared about the bottom line. However, Jovian said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly, "At Croft Holdings, we believe that how you win matters as much as if you win. True sustainable value is not built on scorched earth. It's built on integrity, on foresight, and on partnerships, not on hostile destruction." He turned his full attention back to the audience. "This deal, while profitable in the short term, has damaged relationships with key innovators in the biotech sector and has exposed our firm to significant long-term litigation risks due to the methods employed. The cost of this victory, I fear, will be far higher than the price we paid." It was a complete and utter repudiation. He wasn't just criticizing the deal, he was dismantling the entire philosophy by which Ethan had built his career. He was calling him reckless and short-sighted in front of the entire industry. Jovian then looked directly at Ethan, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He held out the crystal award. "For your victory, Mr. Vance." Ethan took the award. It felt as heavy as a gravestone. His hand was trembling. He mumbled a "thank you" that was swallowed by the cavernous silence. He stumbled back to his table, his face burning with humiliation. Tiffany stared at him, her expression a mixture of fear and disgust. His value in her eyes was plummeting in real time. He watched as Jovian stepped away from the podium, and Eleanor moved gracefully to his side, placing a gentle hand on his arm. They looked like a king and queen surveying their court. Ethan was nothing more than a disgraced court jester. The gala ended soon after. People avoided Ethan's table as if it were radioactive. His colleagues, who had been slapping his back an hour earlier, now couldn't meet his eye. The message was clear: his patron saint had excommunicated him. The drive home was silent and cold. Tiffany sat as far away from him as possible in the back of the town car. So she finally said, her voice dripping with ice, "Your ex-wife is dating the man who owns your company." It wasn't a question. "I didn't know," Ethan said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You didn't know?" She laughed, a shrill, ugly sound. "You, Ethan Vance, the man who knows everything, who prides himself on having all the angles covered. You missed that. You told me she was a nobody, a sad little homemaker, living in some pathetic little apartment. She was," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Clearly she wasn't," Tiffany sneered. "My God, the humiliation. Everyone was looking at me. They weren't looking at me because they were jealous. They were pitying me," she shuddered, "being married to the man whose ex-wife is sleeping with his boss. How do I even show my face at the club tomorrow?" Ethan had no answer. He felt hollowed out, a shell of the man who had left the condo that morning. The kingdom he had been so proud of was a house of cards, and the woman he had cast aside had just revealed herself to be the storm that would bring it all down. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his career at Vanguard was over. Jovian Croft hadn't needed to fire him. He had simply exposed him, and the system would do the rest. He would be sidelined, his projects reassigned, his authority eroded until he had no choice but to resign in disgrace. He thought of Eleanor's calm expression. It wasn't triumphant. It was something far more devastating. It was indifferent. He had ceased to matter enough to her to even be an enemy. He was just a loose end, a piece of her past that had inconveniently surfaced in her present. The ultimate power move wasn't revenge. It was realizing the person who wronged you was now so small, so insignificant, that they were no longer worth the emotional energy. Ethan Vance, the shark, had just been informed he was plankton. The fallout was swifter and more brutal than Ethan could have imagined. The Monday after the gala, he walked into the Vanguard offices, and the atmosphere was thick with his professional obituary. People avoided his gaze. The ones who did speak to him did so with a strained, pitying politeness that was worse than open hostility. Robert Miller, his former champion, called him into his office. The door was closed. "Ethan," Robert began, not even bothering to offer him a seat. "We're going to have to restructure the leadership on the gene-synth integration. Given the feedback from Mr. Croft, we need a different approach, a more diplomatic touch." "You're taking me off my own deal," Ethan asked, the words tasting like ash. "It's not your deal anymore, Ethan. It's the firm's deal. And the firm needs to protect its relationship with its owner," Robert said, his face impassive. "Your other projects will be reassigned as well. We need you to take a step back, focus on internal strategy for a while." Internal strategy, the corporate equivalent of Siberia. He was being put on ice, left to wither in a silent, windowless office until he took the hint and quit. His life began to unravel. Tiffany, seeing that the fountain of money and status was about to run dry, packed her bags within the week. There was no tearful goodbye, just a cold note left on the kitchen's marble island. "I can't be associated with this kind of failure," it read. "My lawyer will be in touch." She even took the drab painting that Eleanor had left behind. He was alone in the sterile condo, the silence now a crushing weight. He would stare out at the city lights, the view that had once made him feel like a king, and feel nothing but vertigo. He was a ghost, haunting the monument to a life that was no longer his. About a month after the gala, his phone rang. It was an unlisted number. "Hello," he answered, his voice flat. "Ethan, it's Eleanor." He froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Eleanor, what do you want?" "I'm at our old coffee shop, the one near the university. I have something of yours. I'd like to give it back." Her voice was even uninflected. It was not a request. He didn't know why he went. Maybe it was a masochistic impulse, a desire to see the full extent of his own destruction. He found her at a small table in the back, a steaming mug in her hands. She looked peaceful. The frantic energy that had defined his own life was completely absent from her. She gestured to the chair opposite her. He sat feeling like a supplicant. "I didn't plan any of this, you know," she said quietly, looking into her mug. "I didn't know who Jovian was in that sense until a few weeks before the gala. I never set out to hurt you." "You could have warned me," he croaked. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were clear and direct. "Why? So you could try to manipulate the situation. So you could try to use my relationship with him to your advantage, the Ethan I knew would have. The man who told me I was a weight holding him down would have seen it as an opportunity." He flinched. The truth of her words was a physical blow. "I'm not here to gloat," she continued. "I'm here because I'm finally closing this chapter of my life, and I want to do it with no loose ends." She pushed a small, velvet box across the table. He opened it. Inside was the simple, elegant engagement ring he had given her 15 years ago. He had told her to sell it during the divorce, that she'd need the money. "Jovian is not a vengeful man, Ethan," she said. "He's a builder. He doesn't enjoy tearing things down. What he said at the gala, that was a business assessment. It was his honest opinion of your work. It wasn't personal for him." It felt personal, Ethan muttered. I know, she said, a hint of sympathy in her voice. Because for you, everything is personal. Your job, your money, your status. That's who you are. You never understood that for me it was always about us, the partnership. When you ended that, you didn't just leave me. You erased the foundation of your own life. You've been in free fall ever since. You just didn't realize it. She stood up, pulling on her coat. Jovian has established a philanthropic arm of his company, the Croft Foundation. He's asked me to run its new Arts and Culture division. I'll be endowing museums, funding scholarships for young artists, the work I dreamed of doing when I was 20. It turns out my quiet little life and my lack of drive were just waiting for the right soil to grow in. She gave him a final lingering look. It was not pity, but a kind of sad farewell. Goodbye, Ethan. I hope you find something real to build on next time. She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him alone with the ghosts of who they used to be and the ruin of who he had become. He looked down at the ring, a perfect circle representing a promise he had shattered. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan Vance wept. He wasn't crying for the loss of his job or his money or his trophy wife. He was crying for the loss of the one thing of true value he had ever possessed, the love of a good woman he had been too arrogant and too blind to deserve. 1 year later, the world was a different place for both of them. Ethan Vance's exile was complete. His formal resignation from Vanguard was less a decision and more an inevitability, a final quiet step in a long fall from grace. His name, once a byword for aggressive success, was now a toxic asset. No major firm would touch him. The story of his public takedown was too potent a modern-day Icarus tale, told over expensive lunches he was no longer invited to. He sold the penthouse to cover the mountain of debt Tiffany's lifestyle had accrued and his own lavish spending had built. The Tom Ford suits were consigned, the sports car repossessed. He eventually found a position 2 time zones away, in a city known for its modesty, not its ambition. He was now a senior analyst at a mid-market logistics firm, a company that moved actual boxes, not abstract millions. His world had become brutally, painfully literal. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a sprawling complex called Oakhaven Meadows. His balcony overlooked not a glittering cityscape, but a communal swimming pool that was drained for half the year. The silence of his old condo had been an oppressive weight. The noise of this new life was a different kind of torture. The thin walls carried the sounds of his neighbors' lives, a baby crying, a couple arguing, the muffled bass of a teenager's music. He was no longer above it all. He was submerged in the mundane mess of ordinary life he had fought so hard to escape. His anonymity was absolute. At the grocery store, he was just a man buying milk. At the office, he was just the new guy from out of town. The deference, the fear, the envy he had commanded were gone. Stripped of his title, his wealth, and his audience, he was forced to sit with the man who remained. He did not like the company. Some nights he would sit in the dark, the velvet box with Eleanor's ring on the coffee table, and trace the path from that first flush of love in a college dorm room to this desolate present. The journey had been about acquisition, and now he understood he had acquired nothing of substance. He had only lost. The work of rebuilding a self, not a portfolio, was arduous and lonely, and it was just beginning. Meanwhile, in a sun-drenched corner office with a view of Central Park, Eleanor Hayes Croft signed off on the final grant of the quarter. Her new name, which she had adopted after a quiet wedding in the Tuscan countryside, felt less like a change and more like a fulfillment. The ceremony had been the antithesis of a vanguard gala. 20 guests, a simple linen dress, and vows exchanged under an ancient olive tree as the sun set. Their honeymoon was spent visiting small, forgotten chapels to see obscure frescoes, their shared joy a quiet, powerful thing. As the director of the Croft Foundation's Arts and Culture Division, Eleanor had become one of the most significant figures in her field. She didn't just write checks, she built programs. She established a first brush grant for artists from low-income backgrounds, providing not just funds, but mentorship and studio space. Her current passion project was the restoration and digitization of the archives of a female surrealist painter from the 1930s who had been overshadowed by her male contemporaries. She was quite literally rewriting art history, giving voice to the silenced and bringing forgotten stories into the light. Her quiet little life had found its grand purpose. Her partnership with Jovian was a study in serene equilibrium. They were a team. He sought her counsel not just on art, but on the human impact of his business ventures. Her perspective, her innate understanding of substance over style, had become his most trusted metric. Their evenings were not spent at galas, but in quiet companionship, reading side by side, debating a new artist she'd discovered, or cooking together in their beautiful warm kitchen. Their power wasn't loud. It wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing each other fully and completely. One evening, as they walked home from a gallery opening, Jovian tucked her hand into his arm. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked softly. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, watching the city lights blur past. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not with anger anymore, just sadness. I think of him like a character in a book I read a long time ago, a man who was so terrified of being ordinary that he never learned how to be truly extraordinary. He thought value was something you could post on a balance sheet." She looked up at Jovian, at this man who owned so much of the world, yet moved through it as if he were merely a grateful guest. "He never understood," she finished, "that the most valuable things in life are the ones that have no price at all." She leaned her head on his shoulder at peace, her past a distant shore, her future an open, beautiful horizon. She rarely thought of Ethan, but when she did, it was with a distant, detached sadness for a man who had traded a masterpiece for a cheap imitation and had only realized its value when it was hanging in another man's gallery, admired by the world he had desperately tried and failed to conquer. And there you have it, the ultimate story of karmic justice. It wasn't about a woman seeking revenge. It was about a woman rediscovering her own immense value, while the man who discarded her learned the brutal difference between price and worth. Ethan Vance chased the glittering hollow prizes of the world, only to find out the real treasure was the person he left behind. Eleanor's victory wasn't just in winning the game. It was in realizing she was never meant to be a player in his. She was the owner of a completely different game, one played with integrity, passion, and grace. If you loved this story of vindication and the powerful truth that a person's worth is never defined by someone else's opinion, make sure to hit that like button and tell us your favorite moment in the comments below. What do you think Ethan's life is like now? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story of drama, intrigue, and life's unexpected twists. Thanks for listening. He was a king in a glass castle, a titan of industry, about to merge empires with the perfect society bride. He had everything he ever wanted bought with the currency of ruthless ambition. The only ghost from his past was an invitation sent out of pure arrogance to the woman he left behind. He expected her to watch his triumph from the sidelines, a relic of a life he'd discarded. He never expected her to walk into his cathedral of success, holding the hand of a little girl, with his face, his eyes, and a secret that would shatter his perfectly constructed world forever. The invitation was an act of cruelty, and Lucas Blackwood knew it. He held the card between his thumb and forefinger, the weight of it satisfying. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the color of old money. The calligraphy, a swirling, perfect script of charcoal ink, was done by a specialist in the Upper East Side who charged more per letter than most people made in an hour. Mr. Lucas Blackwood and Ms. Victoria Davenport request the pleasure of your company at the celebration of their union. It was a statement, not a request. A declaration of victory. Lucas stood in his office on the 85th floor of the Blackwood Tower, a steel and glass needle that pierced the Manhattan skyline. The city spread out below him, a glittering carpet of ambition and dreams he'd long since conquered. At 35, he was the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, a global logistics empire he had inherited as a respectable mid-sized firm, and forged into a behemoth that swallowed competitors whole. His life was a curated collection of successes: the tailored Tom Ford suit that draped his athletic frame, the Patek Philippe leap on his wrist that chimed the passing of time in increments of thousands of dollars, the faint, clean scent of Creed Aventus that announced his presence before he even spoke. And now, there was Victoria. Victoria Davenport was not a conquest. She was an acquisition. The daughter of a rival dynasty, their marriage was less a romance and more a merger of titans, a strategic alliance that would solidify their family's control over shipping lanes and supply chains for a generation. She was beautiful, of course, in the way that expensive things are. Polished, intelligent, and possessing a cool, aristocratic grace that complemented his own sharp-edged demeanor. Their conversations were about market caps and board seats. Their dates were at charity galas and political fundraisers. It was a perfect partnership. So why, as he stared at the list of addresses compiled by his impeccably efficient assistant, did one name cause a tightening in his chest, a phantom ache he hadn't felt in years? Vivian Santos. The name felt alien on the pristine spreadsheet, a wildflower pushing through concrete. 5 years. It had been 5 years since he had last seen her, 5 years since he had made the most difficult and most necessary decision of his life. He remembered the day with brutal clarity. Her small, paint-splattered apartment in Brooklyn, the smell of turpentine, and her lavender soap hanging in the air. He had stood there in a suit much cheaper than the one he wore now, and laid out his future, a future that had no room for a free-spirited, struggling artist who believed love was enough. "It's not enough, Elle," he'd said the words, feeling like shards of glass in his throat. "I want more. I need more." The hurt in her eyes had been a physical blow. She hadn't screamed or cried. That wasn't her way. She had simply looked at him, her gaze so full of a deep, knowing sorrow that it had shaken him to his core. She saw right through him, to the terrified, ambitious boy beneath the burgeoning tycoon. "Then go get it, Lucas," she had whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I hope you find what you're looking for." He had walked away and never looked back. It was the price of his ambition, the sacrifice laid at the altar of his success. He had buried the memory of her laughter, of her warmth, of the way she looked at him, as if he were the only man in the world, under layers of stock portfolios, corporate takeovers, and loveless affairs. His assistant, a prim woman named Caroline, cleared her throat from the doorway. "Sir, is the guest list finalized? The calligrapher is waiting." Lucas's gaze flickered from the spreadsheet back to the opulent invitation in his hand. What was he doing? Inviting Vivian was a pointless, vindictive move, a final twist of the knife to show her what she had lost, what he had become. It was a power play, a way to prove to himself that the last 5 years had been worth it, that his hollow victories were in fact triumphs. He wanted her to see the cathedral he had built on the ashes of their love. He wanted it to burn her. "Add one more," he said, his voice a low command. He read out the address of a small art gallery in Soho, a place he knew she co-owned now. He'd kept tabs on her, of course. Not out of lingering affection, he told himself, but as a matter of due diligence, of tying up loose ends. He knew she had found a small measure of success. Good for her. It would make his own monumental success seem that much greater in comparison. "Vivian Santos," Caroline repeated, typing flawlessly. "Under what relation, sir, friend of the groom?" The question hung in the sterile air. Friend. What a ridiculously inadequate word. She was the woman who had taught him how to love, and the woman he had taught that love was conditional. "An old acquaintance," Lucas said, his voice as cold and hard as the glass tower that surrounded him. "Send it." As Caroline retreated, Lucas turned back to the window, the setting sun casting long, dark shadows across the city. He felt a shiver of something he refused to name. Regret? No. He didn't do regret. This was just closure. A final, definitive closing of a chapter he should have burned long ago. He imagined her receiving the invitation. Would she throw it away in anger? Would she laugh at his audacity? Or would she, for a fleeting moment, feel the same phantom ache he felt now? The thought was a dangerous one. He dismissed it with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to a failing subsidiary. Vivian Santos was the past, a ghost, and ghosts, he knew, had no power over a man like him. He was Lucas Blackwood, and he was about to have it all. The day of the wedding dawned with an almost offensively perfect blue sky. St. Ignatius Loyola, the magnificent Park Avenue church, was a fortress of Gilded Age splendor, its limestone facade basking in the crisp October sunlight. Inside it was a forest of white flowers. Thousands of Casablanca lilies, hydrangeas and roses climbed the marble pillars, their cloying sweet scent mixing with the ancient aroma of beeswax and incense. The guest list was a who's who of global power, tech billionaires from Silicon Valley, stone-faced private equity titans, a senator, and even a European royal of minor but photogenic importance. Lucas stood at the altar, a paragon of cool control. His tuxedo was bespoke, the fit impeccable. At his side, his best man, Michael Corrigan, the only man he trusted implicitly, and his COO gave him a solid, reassuring grin. "Ready to close the deal of a lifetime?" Michael murmured, his Irish humor a familiar comfort. Lucas's lips curved into a semblance of a smile. "The biggest merger of my career." Then the organ swelled, a thunderous, triumphant sound that silenced the rustle of silk and the low hum of polite conversation. The great bronze doors at the end of the aisle swung open, and there was Victoria. She was a vision in custom Vera Wang, an architectural masterpiece of satin and lace that flowed behind her like a river of cream. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon, a cascade of Davenport diamonds glittering at her throat. She was, Lucas thought, with a distant sense of approval, flawless. The perfect bride, the perfect partner. As she walked towards him on the arm of her beaming father, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. This was it, the final piece of his kingdom, the queen for his throne. He had won. He scanned the faces in the pews, a king surveying his court. He saw rivals who were forced to smile, her partners, whose fortunes were tied to his, and the vaguely familiar faces of the city's elite. For a fleeting second, his eyes searched for one face he both craved and dreaded to see. He had received no RSVP from Vivian. He'd told himself it was for the best. Her absence was an admission of her defeat. The ceremony began. The officiant, a bishop with a sonorous voice, spoke of unions and holy matrimony. Lucas's responses were crisp, automatic. He was peripherally aware of Victoria beside him, her hand light on his arm. He was about to recite the vows his legal team had reviewed and his PR team had approved when a faint sound from the back of the church snagged his attention. The heavy doors had opened again, letting in a sliver of bright afternoon light. A woman slipped inside, trying to be unobtrusive. But to Lucas, she was a supernova in the dim, hallowed space. It was Vivian. She wasn't wearing a dress meant to compete or to make a statement. She wore a simple navy blue dress that fell just below her knees. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, and she wore little makeup. She looked herself. The years had added a new layer of grace to her, a quiet confidence that was more unsettling to him than any overt display of anger would have been. She didn't look broken. She looked whole. His carefully constructed composure began to crack. His heart, a dormant, sluggish muscle, gave a painful lurch. The bishop's words faded into a meaningless drone. What was she doing here? Why had she come? And then he saw it. She wasn't alone. Holding her hand, half hidden behind the folds of her dress, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old, with a mass of dark curly hair tied back with a simple blue ribbon. As Vivian gently guided her into the last empty pew, the little girl turned her head, her curious gaze sweeping over the cavernous church. Her eyes met Lucas's. The world stopped. It wasn't just the color, that distinct slate-gray shade that was so unique to the Blackwood family, the same color he saw in the mirror every morning. It was the shape, the intensity, the flicker of defiant curiosity in them. It was his own gaze, staring back at him from the face of a child. She had his hair, that same stubborn wave above the temple. She had the determined set of his jaw, miniaturized on her cherubic face. A cold dread so profound it was paralyzing washed over him. The air in his lungs turned to ice. He could feel the blood draining from his face. Around him, the ceremony continued, a play in which he had forgotten all his lines. He saw Michael's brow furrow in concern. He felt Victoria's hand tighten on his arm, a silent, questioning pressure. Whispers began to ripple through the pews like a lit fuse. A guest in the third row leaned over to another. A socialite who missed nothing turned her head, completely, her eyes wide. The carefully curated perfection of the moment was shattering, piece by piece. "Lucas," Victoria hissed, her voice a sliver of ice. He couldn't answer. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the back of the church. Vivian met his gaze across the sea of faces. There was no triumph in her expression, no malice. There was only a deep, profound sadness. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as if to say, "I didn't want this." "Do you, Lucas Blackwood, take Victoria Davenport to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The bishop's voice boomed, snapping him back to the horrifying present. Silence stretched thick and suffocating. Every eye in the church was on him. He could feel the weight of their collective stare, the impending scandal hanging in the air like a guillotine, his empire, his deal, his perfectly planned future. All of it was balanced on the edge of a knife. He looked at Victoria, at her perfectly beautiful, now pale face, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning fury. Then his gaze snapped back to the child. His child, a daughter, a life he had created and abandoned without even knowing it. The little girl chose that exact moment to yawn, a wide, sleepy, innocent gesture that broke the spell. She was real. This was real. Lucas began, his voice a hoarse, unrecognizable rasp. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing unnaturally in the silent church. He felt the sweat bead on his brow. Yes, he forced out the word, tasting like ash. I do. The rest of the ceremony was a blur, a disembodied nightmare. He moved, spoke, and smiled like an automaton. But his soul, his entire being, was in the back pew, with the ghost of his past and the daughter he never knew he had. As he slid the platinum band onto Victoria's finger, his hand trembled. He wasn't sealing a union. He was locking his own cage. The recessional was a death march. As Lucas and Victoria walked back down the aisle, the triumphant chords of the organ felt like a mockery. The air was thick with unspoken questions. The smiles on the guests' faces were strained, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of impending scandal. The press held back at the main entrance surged forward, their cameras flashing like machine gun fire as the great doors opened. They could smell blood in the water. Victoria's fingers dug into his arm like talons. "You will smile," she commanded, through a clenched, perfect jaw. Her voice was terrifyingly low. "You will get in the car, and you will explain what that woman is doing at our wedding." But Lucas barely heard her. His eyes were scanning the dispersing crowd, a predator searching for his mark. He spotted Vivian, holding Lily's hand, trying to slip out through a side exit away from the main crush. "Not now," he said to Victoria, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He detached her hand from his arm with a finality that made her gasp. "Lucas, do not walk away from me." He ignored her, his long strides cutting a path through the bewildered guests. Whispers followed him like a trail of smoke. He saw his mother's horrified face, his father's stony glare. He saw Michael already on his phone, his expression grim as he began the impossible task of damage control. None of it mattered. He caught up to Vivian in a narrow, cold hallway leading to a small courtyard. It was a service exit, a place of bare stone walls and echoing quiet. He cornered her, placing a hand on the wall to block her path. She stopped, turning to face him. She gently pushed Lily behind her, a subtle, protective gesture that sent another crack through his icy facade. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, controlled roar that echoed in the small space. "What in the hell was that, Vivian? Was this your plan, to humiliate me, to destroy this day? You couldn't just stay away." Vivian looked up at him, her dark eyes unblinking. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't even angry. She just looked tired. "You invited me, Lucas." It was a courtesy, a formality. It was not an invitation to detonate a bomb in the middle of my life. "She's not a bomb," Vivian said, her voice dangerously quiet. "She's a little girl, my little girl. And I didn't intend for this to happen. I thought we could slip in, sit in the back. I don't know what I thought. Maybe that you deserve to see her, to know she exists, but I never wanted a scene." He stared at her, his mind racing, trying to find an angle, a lie, a way this wasn't what it so obviously was. No, no, what, that you had a child? He gestured wildly towards the small figure peeking out from behind her legs. The little girl, Lily, stared at him with those impossibly familiar grey eyes. There was no fear in them, only a solemn curiosity. He couldn't bring himself to ask the question directly. The words were too big, too world-altering. He could only stare, his breath catching in his throat. Vivian saw the conflict in his face, the denial warring with the undeniable truth. She answered the question he couldn't ask. "Her name is Lily Anna Santos," she said softly. "She's 4 years old. Her birthday is July 14th. The date hit him like a physical blow. July. 9 months after he had walked out of her Brooklyn apartment. 9 months to the day. The math was brutal, inescapable. "She's mine." The word came out as a choked whisper. It felt foreign on his tongue. Vivian nodded once, a sharp, definitive movement. "Yes, Lucas, she's your daughter." The confession, as simple and devastating as that, sucked the air from the hallway. The bravado, the anger, the carefully constructed walls of his ego, they all crumbled to dust, leaving him exposed and raw. He staggered back a step, his hand falling from the wall. He felt dizzy, untethered. Why? The word was torn from him, full of an anguish he hadn't felt in 5 years. "Vivian, why? Why wouldn't you tell me?" For the first time, a flicker of heat appeared in Vivian's eyes. The quiet sadness was replaced by a flash of the fiery passion he remembered so well. "Why?" she repeated, her voice rising with years of suppressed pain. "You want to know why? Let's think back, Lucas. Let's remember the man who stood in my apartment and told me that love wasn't a good enough investment. The man who looked at our life together and called it a liability." She took a step forward, closing the space between them. "You walked out that door to build an empire. You made it very clear what your priorities were. So what was I supposed to do? Call you up and say, 'Hi, Lucas. Congratulations on the hostile takeover. By the way, there's a slight complication to your 5-year plan. I'm pregnant.'" Her words were surgical, cutting away his defenses. "I would have—" he started, but he didn't even know how to finish the sentence. "Helped, paid, taken care of it." Every option sounded as cold and transactional as the man she was describing. "You would have what?" she challenged, her eyes searching his. "You would have sent a check, had your lawyers draw up an agreement. You would have seen her as another problem to be managed. I saw her as my child, my entire world. I made a choice, Lucas. I chose to protect her from your world. I chose to give her a life filled with love and art and security, not one where she was a secret, a bargaining chip, or a line item on a balance sheet. She was never going to be your collateral damage." He had no answer, because she was right. 5 years ago, he would have done exactly that. He had spent every day since then becoming a man who was even more capable of that kind of cold calculation. A small tug on Vivian's dress broke the standoff. "Mama, I'm thirsty," Lily's small voice said. Vivian's entire demeanor softened as she looked down at her daughter. She stroked her hair gently. "I know, sweetie. We'll go get a juice box in just a minute." She looked back up at Lucas, her expression once again filled with a weary resolve. "I'm sorry for how this happened, but I'm not sorry she exists, and I'm not sorry for the choice I made." Before he could form a response, the door to the sanctuary swung open. Victoria stood there, her face a mask of glacial fury. 2 large security guards flanked her, Her eyes flickered from Lucas's pale, stricken face to Vivian's defiant one, and then, for a heart-stopping second, they landed on Lily. "Get her out," Victoria said, her voice dripping with venom. It was not a request. It was an order. Victoria's command, "Get her out," hung in the air, sharp and glittering as a shard of broken glass. The two security guards, hulking men in ill-fitting suits, took a hesitant step forward. Their eyes darted nervously between the furious bride, the shell-shocked groom, and the woman holding a small child's hand. This was far beyond their pay grade. Something inside Lucas, something primal and protective he hadn't known existed, snapped into place. Before the guards could take another step, he moved, placing himself directly between them and Vivian. He raised a hand, not in aggression, but with an authority so absolute it stopped the men cold. "Stand down," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension with the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was the voice he used to dismantle corporations, to end careers. The guards froze, looking to Victoria for guidance, but their instinct recognized the true source of power in the hallway. Victoria's face, already pale, contorted with disbelief and rage. "Lucas, have you lost your mind? Get out of the way. I want this trash and her brat removed from my sight." "Her name," Lucas said, turning his head slowly to face his bride, "is Vivian, and the brat is a little girl named Lily. And they are not going anywhere." The finality in his tone was unmistakable. It was a declaration of war. Victoria stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. This was a Lucas she had never seen. The cool, calculating business partner was gone, replaced by a stranger with fire in his eyes. "Are you choosing her over me?" She spat the words laced with venom. "On our wedding day, in front of my family, your family, everyone who matters. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" For the first time, in a very long time, "Victoria, I think I do," he said, the realization dawning on him even as he spoke the words. He felt the foundations of his life, the carefully constructed empire of glass and steel, begin to tremble. And in the center of the tremor was the quiet, steady presence of the daughter he never knew. Vivian, seeing the confrontation escalate into a full-blown war zone, tightened her grip on Lily's hand. "We're leaving," she said, her voice firm. This was not her fight. "Lucas, let us go." She tried to move around him, but he instinctively shifted, blocking her path again. "No," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "Not yet. We're not done. There is nothing left to talk about here," she insisted, her voice rising in desperation. She looked at Victoria's murderous expression, at the looming security guards. "This is a disaster. I need to get Lily out of here." "Mama, what's happening?" Lily whispered, her small face now crumpled with confusion and fear. "That lady is angry." The child's voice pierced through Lucas's shock and Victoria's rage. It was a sound of pure innocence in a moment of profound corruption. Lucas's gaze softened as he looked down at the little girl, his daughter. The fear in her eyes was a knife in his gut. He had created this moment. His arrogance, his cruelty in sending that invitation had led them all to this ugly, sterile hallway. He turned back to Victoria, his decision made. The world of mergers and acquisitions, of galas and power plays, suddenly seemed like a cheap, hollow imitation of life. "The wedding is off," he said, the words falling like stones into a silent pool. Victoria laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You can't be serious. You can't just call it off. This isn't some date you're canceling, Lucas. This is the Davenport-Blackwood merger. Millions of dollars, our family's reputations, Our entire future is riding on this. Then consider it the costliest mistake of my life, he replied, his voice flat. Caroline, he barked, his voice echoing down the hall. His assistant appeared almost instantly, her face a mask of professional panic. Get Michael. Tell him to handle the guests. Announce a family emergency. Give them whatever story he can concoct. The reception is cancelled. Send everyone home. Sir, Caroline stammered, utterly bewildered. Now, he roared. She flinched and scurried away. Victoria stared at him, the full magnitude of his betrayal finally sinking in. The fury was replaced by a look of cold, calculating hatred. This was no longer a lover's quarrel. This was business. You will regret this, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You have no idea the enemy you have just made. My father will ruin you. We will dismantle your company piece by piece. We will bury you, Lucas. Then you'd better start digging, he said, turning his back on her completely. It was the deepest insult. He could deliver a dismissal so total it left her speechless. He crouched down, bringing himself to Lily's level. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was a stranger to this child, a monster who had made her mother cry and her world turn upside down. Hey, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I'm Lucas. He didn't dare call himself her father. He hadn't earned that right. I'm very sorry for all the yelling. That lady, she was just surprised. Lily watched him with wide, wary eyes. She clutched Vivian's leg tighter. He looked up at Vivian, his expression stripped of all pretense. The CEO was gone. All that was left was a man standing in the wreckage of his life. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, he said, his voice raw. But please, don't disappear again. Let me just talk to you. Somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Vivian looked from his pleading face to the chaos unfolding behind him as Michael Corrigan appeared, his face grim, already speaking into a headset to coordinate the shutdown of the most anticipated social event of the year. She saw Victoria now being led away by her own furious father, her eyes promising retribution. The air was electric with scandal. She knew she should run, take Lily, and disappear back into the quiet life she had built for them. But looking at Lucas, truly looking at him for the first time in 5 years, she didn't see the ruthless tycoon. She saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved, lost and broken, and utterly stripped bare, and she saw the father of her child finally seeing his daughter for the very first time. All right, Lucas, she sighed, the fight going out of her. We can talk. The escape from St. Ignatius was a masterclass in crisis management orchestrated by the unflappable Michael Corrigan. While one of Lucas's decoy cars, a gleaming Rolls-Royce, peeled away from the front entrance into a maelstrom of flashing cameras and shouting reporters, Michael hustled Lucas, Vivian, and a now frightened Lily out a discreet side door into a cobblestone alley. A black, unassuming sedan idled there, its engine a low hum. Get in. Go, Michael commanded, his eyes already scanning for new threats. My driver knows where to take you. I'll handle the press and both your families. It's going to be a long night, Lucas. Go dark. Lucas nodded, his mind still a whirlwind. He slid into the back of the car, the leather cool against his skin. Vivian followed, lifting a weary Lily onto her lap. The door closed with a solid soundproof thud, instantly sealing them in a bubble of surreal quiet. As the car pulled away, the distant sirens and chaos of Park Avenue faded, leaving only the soft swish of the tires on asphalt. Lily, exhausted by the emotional upheaval, fell asleep against Vivian's chest, her small face peaceful in the dim interior light. Vivian stared out the window, her reflection a ghostly image superimposed over the blur of the city. Lucas watched them, his tailored tuxedo feeling like a ridiculous costume from another life. The scent of Victoria's expensive perfume still clung to him, a sickly sweet reminder of the disaster. He was the master of his universe, a man who controlled global logistics with a keystroke. Yet in this small, confined space, he was utterly powerless. He didn't know what to say, how to begin to unravel the knot of the last 5 years. "I'm sorry" was a pathetically inadequate phrase for the cataclysm he had unleashed. The driver, following Michael's instructions, bypassed the gleaming, soulless penthouse at Blackwood Tower. Instead, he navigated the quieter streets of the West Village, pulling up to an elegant but discreet brownstone. It was a property Lucas had owned for years, a private sanctuary he used for meetings too sensitive for the office. It was anonymous, secure, and most importantly, empty. Inside the house was cool and quiet. The decor was masculine and minimalist: dark woods, leather furniture, abstract art, but it had a warmth his penthouse lacked. It felt like a home, not a monument. Vivian gently laid the sleeping Lily on a large plush sofa in the living room, covering her with a cashmere throw. For a moment, they both just stood there, watching the gentle rise and fall of the little girl's chest. She was the anchor in their swirling storm, the undeniable, beautiful truth at the center of all the lies. "Can I get you something?" Lucas asked, his voice hoarse. "Water, wine." "Water is fine," Vivian said, not looking at him. He went to the kitchen, the simple act of opening a cabinet and pouring 2 glasses of water, feeling foreign and clumsy. He returned and handed her a glass. Their fingers brushed, and a jolt of static, a memory of a different kind of touch, passed between them. She pulled her hand back quickly. She took a sip and finally turned to face him, her eyes dark and weary. "Okay, Lucas, we're here. We're quiet. Now talk." He stood across the vast living room, the space between them feeling like a canyon. "I don't know where to start." "Start with why," she said, her voice flat. "Why did you send that invitation? Was it not enough to break my heart? Did you have to try and grind it into dust, too?" He flinched. The raw honesty of her question left him with no defense. It was arrogant. He admitted the confession, costing him. "It was cruel. I wanted to show you what I had become, what you had missed out on. It was a petty, pathetic power play, and I am ashamed of it." It was more than she had expected. She had anticipated excuses, justifications. The blunt self-condemnation surprised her. "And now you have," she said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent room. "Congratulations. You got everything you wanted. The empire, the money, the perfect society bride. Was it worth it?" He thought of the hollow years, the empty victories, the silent, sterile penthouse. He thought of the cold partnership he'd almost cemented into a marriage. And then he looked at the sleeping child on the sofa. "No," he said, the single word filled with a profound and aching clarity. "It wasn't." He took a tentative step closer. "You asked me why you shouldn't have told me about her. You were right. About all of it. The man I was, the man I became. I would have hurt you. I would have hurt her. I would have seen her as a complication, a threat to the plan. I would have thrown money at the problem and tried to make it disappear." He finally met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a desperate, raw plea. But that man just blew up his entire life in a church hallway because he saw his daughter's face for the first time. That man is gone, Vivian. Or at least, I want him to be. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes, tears of anger, sorrow, and 5 years of unresolved pain. You have no idea what it was like, she whispered. The fear. Finding out I was pregnant the week after you left. Being completely alone. The morning sickness while trying to finish a commission to pay my rent. Going to doctor's appointments by myself, seeing all the happy couples. She paced the room, the words spilling out of her now. But then, she was born. And none of the hardship mattered. I would hold her, and this perfect tiny person would look up at me, and I felt a love so fierce it was terrifying. I promised her I would protect her, that I would always be enough for her. And I was. We were happy, Lucas. We have a good life. A small life, by your standards, but a happy one. I don't want to take that away, he said desperately. I want to know her. Please, let me be her father. I know I have to earn it. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll take parenting classes. I'll sit on the floor and play with dolls for 1,000 hours. I'll give you any legal agreement you want that ensures you have full control. I don't want to be a ghost in my own daughter's life. He was rambling the words, tumbling out, stripped of his usual eloquent control. He was negotiating, but not for a company. He was negotiating for a soul, his own. Vivian stopped pacing and looked at him. She saw the desperation, the fear, the genuine earth-shattering remorse in his eyes. This wasn't a play. This was a man broken open by a truth he could no longer deny. Lily stirred on the sofa, murmuring something in her sleep. Instinctively, they both moved towards her. They stood side by side, looking down at their child. His daughter, her daughter, theirs. You can see her, Vivian said softly, making the decision that would change all their lives forever. We'll start slow. A park, an ice cream shop, on my terms, under my supervision. And the second you hurt her, Lucas, the second you disappoint her or treat her like anything less than the center of the universe, you're gone. For good. Do you understand? He looked from Lily's sleeping face to Vivian's determined one. I understand, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. In the quiet of the brownstone, surrounded by the wreckage of his former life, Lucas Blackwood felt a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a young man in a small Brooklyn apartment. Hope. It was terrifying, and it was the only thing that mattered. The dawn brought no relief, only a clearer view of the devastation. The news was a firestorm. William Davenport, looking every bit the powerful wronged patriarch, had appeared on live television from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. He spoke of a shocking and profound betrayal, and questioned Lucas's stability and character. It was a declaration of open financial warfare. The stock ticker at the bottom of the screen told the story. Blackwood Enterprises was in free fall. The Blackwood Tower, once a symbol of impenetrable strength, now felt like a fortress under siege. Lucas and Michael Corrigan worked around the clock, fighting to contain the damage. But for the first time in his life, Lucas's focus wasn't entirely on the battle for his company. He was fighting on a second front, one that mattered far more, and it took place on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and all day on Saturdays. These were his hours with Lily. His first attempt was a disaster. In a clumsy effort to apologize for the wedding fiasco, he had the flagship FAO Schwartz deliver a mountain of expensive toys to the brownstone, life-size dolls, a motorized pink car, an art easel that cost more than Vivian's first gallery showing had earned. Lily's eyes grew wide, but she seemed more overwhelmed than excited. Vivian watched her arms crossed, a sad, knowing look on her face. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said quietly. "You have a problem, you throw money at it until it goes away." She picked up a simple box of sidewalk chalk from the pile. "Her favorite thing to do is find interesting rocks in the park," she said, her voice softening. "It's free. Try starting there." Humbled Lucas took her advice. Their next outing was to a small playground in Brooklyn. Dressed in jeans and a t-shirt that felt like a costume, he sat awkwardly on a bench until Lily called out from the swing set, "You have to push me." He walked over and, with a hesitation that felt absurd, placed his hands on the small of her back and gently pushed. She squealed with delight. For 20 minutes, the world of stock markets and lawsuits ceased to exist. There was only the weight of his daughter in his hands and the sound of her laughter. He started learning. He learned that her favorite color was sparkly purple, and that she could be mesmerized for an hour by a line of ants. He took her to the Museum of Natural History, where instead of the giant blue whale, she fell in love with a small display of iridescent beetles. The next day, he bought her a simple book about beetles, and she made him read it to her 3 times in a row, her small head resting against his chest. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and the feeling of her warmth and trust was so overwhelming he had to swallow past a lump in his throat. Vivian was always there, a watchful, cautious presence. She saw the changes in him, the genuine joy on his face when Lily grabbed his hand to cross the street. One rainy Saturday at her apartment, she decided to put him to the test. "I need to go to the gallery for a few hours," she said, her eyes searching his. "Will you be okay here with her?" It was the first time she had offered to leave them completely alone. "Of course," Lucas said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. After she left, the weight of responsibility was immense. He made Lily a snack of apple slices and cheese squares, cutting them into careful, bite-sized pieces. They ate together at her tiny table. It was the most important meal of his life. Later, he heard a crash from the living room. He ran in to find Lily on the floor, tears welling in her eyes. A small ceramic bird, one of Vivian's own sculptures, lay shattered on the wooden floor. "It was an accident," Lily sobbed. "I was trying to make it fly." The old Lucas would have been furious. The new Lucas knelt on the floor, ignoring the sharp ceramic shards, and gathered his crying daughter into his arms. "Hey, it's okay," he murmured, rocking her gently. "Accidents happen. Mama will understand. We'll clean it up together." When Vivian returned, hours later, she found them sitting on the floor, painstakingly gluing the bird back together. Lily was solemnly explaining that birds needed special glue to heal their wings, and Lucas was listening with the focus he usually reserved for a corporate merger. Vivian leaned against the doorframe, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. He was trying. He was really, truly trying. The fragile piece was shattered the following Monday. His phone rang. It was Michael, his voice tight with a fury Lucas had never heard before. "He's done it, Lucas. The bastard actually did it." "Did what, Davenport?" "He found our weakness. It's not the company. It's her." Michael took a breath. "He's filed a motion with family court. He's petitioning for a paternity test and concurrently filing for a custody hearing. He's alleging that Vivian is an unfit mother and you're a dangerous influence. He's not trying to take Lily, Lucas. He's trying to get her put into the foster care system just to hurt you both." Lucas felt the blood run cold in his veins. William Davenport wasn't just trying to destroy his company anymore. He was trying to take his daughter. The legal documents arrived like a declaration of war, a thick manila envelope that felt heavier than a block of lead. Lucas read them in his lawyer's office, the legalese a blur of vicious calculated cruelty, unstable environment, questionable sources of income, potential emotional and developmental harm. Every line was a poisoned dart aimed at Vivian, twisting her life as an artist into a narrative of neglect. When he showed her the papers that evening, the color drained from her face. She did not cry, but her hands trembled with a rage so profound it was terrifying. "He wants to put her in foster care," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "He would take my baby and give her to strangers just to punish you." "To punish us," Lucas corrected, his own voice tight with a fury he had never known. This was beyond business. This was evil. "He's won," Vivian said, her voice hollow. "How do I fight William Davenport?" Lucas crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her trembling hands. "He has not won. He thinks he's attacking two separate people. He doesn't realize he just created an alliance." He stood, the old strategic mind kicking into high gear, now fueled by a righteous fire. "You are the best mother I have ever seen. I will hire the best family law attorney in the country. We will fight this, but we won't just defend. We're going on the offense." The word hung in the air between them. He turned to Michael Corrigan, who was waiting grimly. "Retask our entire corporate intelligence division. Forget his business dealings. I want to know everything about William Davenport personally. Every skeleton, every hushed-up scandal. I want to know where he buries the bodies." For weeks, they prepared for the court battle, while Lucas's team dug relentlessly into Davenport's past. They found whispers of shady deals and hushed-up affairs, but nothing that constituted a silver bullet. The breakthrough came from a retired journalist who, for a steep price, told a story he'd kept secret for 20 years. It was about Victoria's older brother, who had officially died in a tragic boating accident. The truth was far darker. He had been drunk reckless and had crashed into a small fishing boat. A young girl on that boat was seriously injured, left with a permanent disability. William Davenport had used his immense power and wealth to silence the family and scrub the entire incident from the record. Michael laid the file on Lucas's desk. "He buried it," Michael said. "It's the one thing that could destroy his family man image forever." Lucas stared at the file. This was the weapon. It was nuclear. The old Lucas would have used it without a second thought, but he thought of Lily, of what it meant to be a father. Did he want her to one day learn that her father had built their new life on the ruins of another family's tragedy? He closed the file. There had to be a better way. He picked up the phone and made a call, not to a newspaper, but to William Davenport's private line. "William," he said, "the war is over. We need to meet. Just you and me." They met in a private wood-paneled room in an old Manhattan club. William sat rigid and imperious, his face a mask of contempt. "This is a waste of my time. My lawyers will see you in court." Lucas didn't rise to the bait. He simply slid the unmarked file across the polished mahogany table. "Before they do," he said quietly, "you should read that." William's legendary composure began to crack as his eyes scanned the first page. He turned to a copy of a bank transfer to the silenced family, and his face went pale. By the time he reached the last page, recent photos of the girl, now a woman who still walked with a pronounced limp, his hands were shaking. The mask was gone, replaced by the face of a frightened, guilty old man. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice a hoarse rasp. "Blackmail." "No," Lucas said, leaning forward, his voice grave. "It's leverage. The old me would have already sent this to every news outlet on the planet. I would have destroyed you, your company, and your family's name for generations, and I would have enjoyed it." He paused. "But that man is gone. I'm a father now, and being a father has taught me that some victories aren't worth the cost of the battle. Destruction is easy. Building something is hard." "What do you want?" William asked, the fight gone from his voice. "It's simple," Lucas said. "You will immediately and permanently withdraw the custody petition and issue a public statement retracting all allegations against Miss Santos. You will cease all hostile actions against Blackwood Enterprises. In return, this file will be secured and never seen again." He leaned back. "But that's not all. You're going to reopen the anonymous trust for the family of the girl you injured. And you're going to triple its value. You're not going to fix the past, but you're going to start paying for it. Properly." William was speechless, outmaneuvered by a man who had the power to ruin him and chose not to. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why not destroy me? Because my daughter is going to grow up knowing her father is a man who builds things, not a man who breaks them," Lucas said simply. "Because Vivian, the woman you tried to ruin, has taught me that some lines aren't worth crossing. Your war is over, William, but you will never ever come near my family again." He stood up. "You have 24 hours. 6 months later, the world had moved on. The feud ended with a terse joint statement. Blackwood Enterprises, leaner and stronger, had stabilized, but the real change was in the quiet moments. It was Lucas, sitting on a park bench, watching Lily chase a butterfly. Vivian sat beside him, sketching. The tension between them had been replaced by a comfortable, easy partnership. They were co-parents, allies, and slowly friends. "She looks happy," Lucas said, a quiet sense of wonder in his voice. "She is," Vivian agreed, turning to him with a small smile. "We both are. You're a good father, Lucas." The words were a balm to his soul, more valuable than any corporate valuation. "I'm trying. I have a good teacher." He had moved out of the sterile Blackwood Tower and into the village brownstone, a home now filled with Lily's drawings, interesting rocks, and the lingering scent of paint. His life was no longer about market caps. It was about sidewalk chalk and bedtime stories. He had lost a billion-dollar merger and a society queen. He had faced down ruin and scandal. But as he watched his daughter hold a butterfly gently in her cupped hands and then open her fingers to let it fly free, Lucas Blackwood knew he hadn't lost a thing. He had gained the entire world. In the end, Lucas Blackwood learned the ultimate lesson of power. The greatest empires aren't built of steel and glass, but of love, forgiveness, and second chances. He set out to prove to his ex what she had lost, only to discover everything he had thrown away. His story is a powerful reminder that our biggest mistakes can lead to our greatest treasures, and that a man's true worth is not measured by the fortune he builds, but by the family he chooses to fight for. It's a journey from ruthless ambition to profound love, proving that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you truly need. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a story of redemption, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable dramas. Let us know in the comments what you think Lucas should do next.